What is the supernatural power that is able to flow through the human being, the initiate, to transform the world around him or her? We are talking today about Hamingja, the ancient Norse conception, often translated as luck, but so much more than that. I'm Angel Miller. I'm the author of the 3 Stages of Initiatic Spirituality, The Path of the Warrior Mystic, and most recently, Transcend the Chaos, Proven Integral Techniques for Emotional Control, Confidence, and Creativity. Now, I'm going to begin this video with a little anecdote, since I think it illustrates on some level the supernatural Hamingja luck, however we might want to see it, and what we are diving into. Now, recently I've been doing a little more research into chaos magic, and in particular the history of chaos magic, having been involved with it at the age of 19 many decades ago, for reasons that will become obvious. Now, my book, Transcend the Chaos, another plug I know, is now available. Next year, I have a book coming out on the Filgia, the sort of supernatural female being that turns up at the end of, particularly of a man's life, to transport him across the threshold of death into some other world. And related to that, other literary instances of the supernatural female, from the goddess to the fairy, for example. Now, during my recent researches, I was reading Dave Lee's Chaos Ritual, and I believe it's in that book, or not one of his others, that he mentions Ingrid Fisher, who was the first woman to become a first degree in the Illuminates of Thanatos, of which I was a member many decades ago. And he mentions that she had written a book on this same subject, the Filgia and Jungian psychology. I also talk about Jung in there, and Freud, and all kinds of other good things. And I was completely struck by this because it sounded a lot like my book, that I just finished writing a few months earlier, and that will be out in 2026. And I'm good at finding obscure books, and I looked for this book online. I looked everywhere for it. I couldn't find it anywhere. I could barely find a mention of it. Then about 3 weeks later, the publisher of the book contacted me and asked me if I would mind writing a blurb for it, and it is here. Ingrid Fisher's Soul of the North, towards a synthesis of Jungian psychology and the way of the hero. And again, the way of the hero very much relates to my own path of the warrior mystic. And so I was completely stunned that after looking for this book, not being able to find it anywhere, just having found out about it a few weeks earlier, the publisher had written to me to ask me to write a blurb for it. And I should say, the publisher did not know that I had just written a book on the same subject. Now, the name of my upcoming book is Supernatural Woman and the Male Initiate Bonded Through Dreams. I really do like the subtitle, which in a sense sort of is a subtitle that encapsulates the kind of magical connection between people, which is also very appropriate. Now, why am I beginning with this story? So I knew Ingrid literally decades ago, in 1990 and 1991. I can actually remember meeting her. I met her and her husband. I don't know if they were married at the time, but they were later, at least. Ian Reed and Nick Hall. Nick Hall later wrote the book Chaos and Sorcery, and they were three of the more active members in the Illuminates of Thanatos' only London temple at the time, Temple Misanthropy. Charles Brewster was also a member, and there were 1 or 2 others. But I met those 3 in the same evening, I believe in Pimlico, in a pub in Pimlico. It was a small event to get to know people, to get to know the Illuminates of Thanatos, to see if there was an interest in them initiating people and non-members being initiated. I believe that only one other person turned up that night, and certainly I spent a lot of time talking, especially with Nick Hall. We both had long hair and like similar-ish music. Obviously, I like cooler music. I was into Motorhead, and he was into Hawkwind. Some may disagree that is the cooler of the two, Motorhead, but I remember distinctly meeting her, and I knew her a little bit. We were in the same London temple, with only about 8 members in it. And then 30 years later, we both have written a book on exactly the same subject. I try to find it. I can't find it. And then a few weeks later, I'm approached by the publisher to write a blurb for this book. Now, I suspect if Ingrid died a few years ago, but if she were alive today, I suspect that she would say, well, that's because we created a kind of Hamingja in that time, which was extraordinarily turbulent in the in temple misanthropy in the Illuminates of Thanateros, and that this Hamingja had somehow taken fruition decades later, and we had written something very similar, even though we hadn't really discussed these subjects while I was a member, and that there's some weird, not only in the normal sense of the word, but WYRD, weird, some weird connection that was formed between us. Now, and I don't mean just between her and I, but members of that group at that time that is coming to fruition later on. And, in occult orders, of course, there is this idea of the egregore, and that was certainly something that was mentioned, although not entirely integral to the temple. We didn't have a particular form, as I remember. I did do a drawing of a chaos sphere with snakes as instead of arrows, which may have been some kind of egregore. But the groups of any kind create some kind of egregore, whether they are a magical group or a religious group or a political group or a business or whatever it may be. In the occult, though, of course, the egregore is seen to be or recognized as having a kind of personality and a face that one can detect, or that might show up in dreams and this kind of thing, to make it easier to communicate with. But again, as I say, I think that Ingrid would say that, well, this weird synchronicity, as Jung would say, occurred because we had created this Hamingja, which in a sense would be linked to the egregore. This Hamingja that is coming to fruition many decades later in this very strange coincidence or synchronicity. Let me read just one paragraph from The Soul of the North. So, speaking of the Hamingja, Ingrid says that it can, quote, be compared with the persona and even with the ego. From the corpus of Old Norse literature, we know that the Hamingja, or at least parts of it, could be transferred to other people or objects. When, for example, a king grasped the hand of his warriors, they would feel the king's power and strength flowing into their bodies and perceive this encounter like a warmth flooding their arms. The Hamingja was the part of a man by which he was known and through which he became famous for his deeds, his honor, and his whole being. Unquote. There's something intriguing about this passage. She compares it to the persona and even to the ego of Jungian psychology, but at the same time it has a kind of energy to it that you can feel it viscerally. You grasp the warrior's hand or the king's hand or the leader's hand or some kind of important, powerful individual, and you feel it like a warmth going up your arm, according to Old Norse sources. So it is physical as well as mental or spiritual. Now, today, of course, in our increasingly electronic world, we are less and less inclined to be in the vicinity of the people we communicate with. Maybe we're communicating with people online, and certainly we're not going to be grasping their hand, and we're kind of retreating from the world into these electronic spaces as a result. And we've been retreating from the physical world for decades. Take a look at architecture. I know it's a point I've made before, but architecture was once full of imagery, gargoyles, strange carvings of shields and filigree and all kinds of things that would draw the eyesight into it. Or, even more importantly, very often the lower level, the ground level, was fairly plain, and then it would get more ornate as it went up to draw the eye upwards towards the divine, the heaven, the sacred, and so on. And of course, keeping one's chin up is supposed to be what one would do to be hopeful, to be optimistic, to have some kind of will, or we might even say some kind of Hamingja. So it is drawing us upwards toward the sacred, the divine, the truly human in a complete sense. Now, of course, today architecture is largely uniform. The ground floor of a building is identical to 5 floors up or 50 floors up. It's basically the same as the top floor. Maybe there's some interesting angle that's been cut out of it or whatever it is, but it's basically steel and glass or concrete and glass, plain, and every floor is basically the same, and there's no reason to look up at all. There's this sort of equalizing but gravity, the downward pull, because there's no need to look up. There's no point in looking up. And so we have retreated from the physical world, and one sees this in the world of spirituality as well, where people want to escape the world and escape into the fantasy and the imagination. Imagination is a good thing that needs to be cultivated, but we shouldn't be escaping the world as it is. Now, in Freemasonry, of course, Ingrid was talking about the king shaking or holding the hand of one of his warriors. And in Freemasonry, of course, there is a moment in the rituals when the master will hold the hand of the initiate. And so there is this physical connection that goes back and back and back hundreds of years. The official beginning of Freemasonry, it's really 1717, when these 4 different lodges came together to form a Grand Lodge. And that's really considered the official beginning of Freemasonry. But you might notice that there were 4 lodges already in existence, and through records of lodges, which were builders' lodges mostly, that some of them initiated gentlemen for whatever reason, and looking at records which go back to about 1400, 1450, it's clear that there is a long continuous history. It's going back about 600 years at this point, that provably. Now, whether we go that far back or just to 1717, so there is this act of the master gripping the initiate's hand. There is a physical contact that has existed, or that has continued from master to initiate, who becomes a master and then initiates someone else, who becomes a master and initiates someone else through 3 centuries. Today, of course, one finds self-initiated master magicians who have never belonged to anything, but who are teaching what they learn from books at a probably elevated price, no doubt. And, is there anything wrong with initiation? I myself, when I think about what I know and what I have done, what I've experienced, most of what I know has not been taught to me. It's the result of my own research and the result of my own practice or experience, whatever it may be. But that said, the little bit of communication, or whatever communication I had, whatever lessons I learned from other people directly, were absolutely invaluable. And simply being around other people who were brilliant or who had unique insights into the world or into literature or into art or religion or whatever it was life-changing. Small in the great scheme of things, though they may have been. And, to have been in the physical presence of those people, to have, shaken their hand, not necessarily Freemasons that I'm thinking of, Catholics, sort of intellectual people, artists, or whatever it is. But, to be in the vicinity of such people and to be able to, shake their hand or maybe touch them on the shoulder or whatever is entirely a different quality to self-initiation. In self-initiation, of course, there's no real egregore. Of course, you might say, well, I'm drawing on the egregore of the tradition, but something is very integral, is clearly missing. There is no Hamingja, this thing which Ingrid relates to the persona, the ego, but also to this physical kind of energy that is embodied in some human being of excellence and is passed in part to his or her comrades, the people that are with him, that stand with him, that are initiated together, who are on some kind of quest together. This sort of Hamingja is completely absent in the world of self-initiation, which may be very valuable for some people, but I think that there has to be something more. And as we retreat from the world, as we go into ourselves and into these electronic bubbles, we need to resist that and cultivate Hamingja, cultivate luck. This luck, not that it's random and I found $10 on the floor and that was lucky, but luck that is cultivated by us, partly through our persona, our ego, our presence, who we are, our dynamism, our force of nature that comes through us, and partly with the people who are around us, people of excellence that we can associate with, that we can learn from, that we can even physically touch. We are that close to. These people are in a different realm, they're in the physical realm, a different realm to those that we can only communicate with online, as valuable as that may be. But we need to return to the physical and to cultivate this Hamingja, this luck that is a physical force that can be cultivated and shared with others. Well, thanks very much. And once you have gone out and bought Transcend the Chaos, do pick up a copy of Ingrid Fisher's The Soul Law of the North. It's a very interesting and unusual read and will be of great value to you, especially if you're interested in Jungian psychology or ancient Northern European thought.